Hello, I'm Andy King, technical editor of Good Woodworking magazine, and today we're going to do a little bit of work on basic workshop rotation within machinery. Okay, I touched upon snipe earlier on, and what it is basically is there's two principles of it. It's mostly on the thicknessing table you get it. If you get it on the surfacing table, it's usually a problem with the beds not being set correctly or the knives, and that's easy enough sorted out. On the actual thicknessing problem, what it is when the timber goes in, the actual roller grabs it and it's got a tendency to kick it up. And as it does, it will then bounce it back down again and it will jump and hit the cutters. And when it cuts, that's what takes a tiny little scoop that way. On the outfeed, you've got the same problem. As it comes out the outfeed, the pressure comes off the infeed roller and again it lets it jump again. And that can jump it back up into the cutters again. So you end up with two situations where you can get it infeed and outfeed. And it's basically down to the pressure of the rollers. Now, some machines, well, this one's got one, I can't really see it, but there are adjustments on the rollers on some of them, so you can actually release the pressure a little bit, which does help. But you can have it so slack that it won't pull the timber through. So it's a sort of compromise between the two. But to be honest, it's something that, as I say, I was always taught you should allow for at any machining stage. Now, what you can do with short components like this is, rather than end up with snipe on every one, if you've got a problem with snipe on your machine, is as the first one comes through, I'll just wind that bed down just to show you the principle of it. As this comes through, you can then put the second one in behind it. So as this one feeds through, it's still got constant pressure on the rollers, so the next one comes through again, and likewise you can keep on feeding short components through. You can do it with long ones as well if you want, but the problem is, obviously, the shorter it is, you've got to do a bit of a juggling act to try and keep everything going where it is, and you can end up sort of compromising your own safety if you're not too careful. So I always sort of try and put them through one at a time wherever possible and allow for the snipe if I need to. As I say, all the timber is ready prepped now, so it's just a matter now of looking at the facing edges of where we're going to take our next stage, which is going to be on the spindle moulder, to take some rebates and some grooves out for a panel and the door to sit into itself. Okay, so that's our next phase, is over onto the spindle moulder. So with the timber all marked up, obviously the principle of facing edges are, as you can see here, basically, although nothing's jointed yet as such and it's not where it's going to be, but if you look here, faces are all up, edges are all in. The idea being is what would be the seen face, for argument's sake, is this edge, this face here, and the edges are all going to be seen as well. These outer faces, or edges should I say, are now going to be constrained within a frame, so you don't see them very often. So your best parts are always on view, let's put it that way. There are alternatives, obviously. You might find tables are a good example where, in actual fact, the inside faces, which would be the facing edges, you would prefer on the outside, because you look at the outside of table legs, you don't look at the inside of them. That's where it gets a little bit more complicated. Then you then got to work your principles back to front slightly, but we won't go into that at this stage. We'll just stick to the general basics of facing edge marks and what they should be. So we've got everything all marked up and gauged in. So it's now a matter of principle, just going straight onto the machine, getting our machining done, and then we can go on to the mortiser. Well, actually, no, beyond that, what we'll do is get our machining done, then we'll show the basics of using a rod, okay, because that is the next logical step from this. Others will tell you different, but this is the way I prefer to work, and I'll explain that in a second. Okay, so onto the spindle moulder. Now, firstly, because we're set up with the grooving bit, that's what we'll do first. Now, with this one, because it's a central groove, what I've done is I've made the groove slightly wider than the actual cutter itself. So what it allows me to do, although it means I've got to work off the wrong side, you put the facing edge down to the fence like that, but then you flip it over and run it through again, and it gives you a perfectly central groove. It doesn't have to be that way, it just makes life a little bit easier at a later stage when you're doing other work, because it means on the bandsaw, for argument's sake, when you're cutting the tenon cheeks, again, you can do similar thing, cut one side, turn it over, cut the other. Because we're working on straight square stock, there's no mouldings or anything. Just makes life a little bit more easy. So that's what I've done. I've set it up so it just works one side, flip it over, do it again, makes it central, and it gives me the groove size I need. So that's the stage right at the moment. Now, I'll just do a little bit of work on the spindle itself. What you've got here is two fences. Basically, the principle is, in normal circumstances, is those have got to be in line with each other. Because what goes through has got to be carried on the other side. There are circumstances where you alter the fences, and usually this one goes out, and the reason being is, if you've got say a rebate cutter there, you can use these as a rudimentary jointer, for argument's sakes. So if you want to just joint an edge, or even just do a stop, Then you can push that through, and as it comes through, obviously this edge then isn't supported, so it's just as easy it can do that, or even when it comes off this end, if you're doing a full cut, it will jump back into the cutter that way. So the idea being is you pull this forward to take up anything you take out. And it works again with moulding. So if you've got a really elaborate moulding and you're taking out, you know, what would be a defined part of that profile away as part of the detail, again, as this comes through, you push this up just to support the work. That's all it does really, it's just more support. Now the other thing which I think is a step in the wrong direction is to put aluminium facings on these things. I much prefer the old timber facings because you could actually tack what's called a sacrificial fence on it, which is just basically a straightforward little bit of MDF, 6mm or something like that. And the idea being is it just encloses the cutter in completely in, and then what you do is set the machine going and you just push it back, and it just projects the cutter through, and all it does then, it gives you a zero clearance, and it gets over any problems which you may find, which sometimes you'll get a slight step in these. And again, it's not a flaw with a spindle moulder because you've got castings here, and keeping these castings flat is a little bit tricky, I suppose, for the machining stage, certainly on what would be classed as a budget machine like this one. So what you can find is you can push this through and you'll find it'll clip on the bottom and it'll be missing on the top. You'll always see it on spindle moulders for years gone by, the big old Wadkins I used to work on in the past. What you'll find is down the back of the fences, you'll find little bits of paper, bits of cardboard, all sorts of things. All it's doing is just twisting that fence back where it should be, bringing it back into line, so that as the timber comes through, all you're looking to do really is basically eliminate snipe. Yet again, it's snipe on a planer thicknesser, just the other way around. Now you've actually put your surfacing bed up the other way, really. It's up on 90 degrees. You've got the same problem, it'll come through and it'll jump and it'll snipe it. But again, if you allow component sizes to be what they're meant to be, then that won't be an actual problem if you do get it, because it's still only going to be those last couple of inches, and those are going to be cut away at the actual final stages. So in that respect, it doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to look at doing now is I'm just going to do one test cut on this. I've set the fence back far enough to give me the depth of cut I need, which I did mark on one of these, which is there, which is about 8mm, if I remember rightly, 8 or 9mm. Yeah, it's about 9mm. And again, that doesn't really matter. It depends on what you're going to put in. If it's going to be timber, you've then got to work on allowing for expansion contraction on the panel itself. So you need to work out, you know, how much you need to leave. You don't want to leave it too shy, so when it comes out, the panel misses, it jumps out the slot. And too deep, you don't want to leave it too deep so that when it goes in, it's going to rattle around if it dries out too much. So it's a sort of compromise, and different timber is obviously going to shrink more than others. I suppose a good rule of thumb would be, I would say personally, I'd probably do about maybe 10, 12mm on a what would be a 300mm wide panel. So if it was 300mm natural timber, I'd probably leave certainly at least about 10mm into there, maybe 12, and then leave a couple of mil gap, 3mm either side, this side and the opposing style here, to allow for movement through seasons. That gives you enough room for it to pull this way to swell it up, and obviously to close down that way and still keep the panel within it. It's one of those things you've really got to suck it and see. Again, the quality of timber helps. This is nice, close grain timber. It's not going to be is sort of moisture sucking up, maybe for argument's sake, to some of the other ones, the fast growing species especially. Anyway, so what I'll do now is I'll just get this set ready to go, and we'll just do a cut and see where we are. So the hood goes on and locks in. Okay, so now you flip it, so you have the facing edge down, facing edge up now. Edge still into the fence, and then you feed it through again. That gives you a central groove now, and it's also left a nice crisp clean line, so it's brought to the gauge line. So you put all four through like that. Okay, so that's the door stock machined up, and it's just creased the gauge line, left a nice clean straight timber there, no chips or anything. So that's what we're trying to achieve. So now we work on the block. So we need to swap this all over, get the block set up to do the rebates on the frame. Yeah. Okay, so we've swapped it over now. We've got the rebating block in. So I've just made a test cut, and you can see obviously I'm where I need to be. My lines are just coming out now and leaving nice crisp clean edges. So I can machine this through. Okay, so that's that. Of course, the beauty of a spindle moulder is you can take out all that in one hit. You struggle to do that at a router table. It doesn't hurt actually if you've got the time and inclination to actually just slightly tweak it to take one final skimming cut. It's always nice to get a nice clean finish. If you've got the time or whatever, if it's just a little one-off like this, then maybe not, but certainly for the better stuff, it's always nice to get a final skim cut on anything really. Okay, so here are our components machined. So now we need to do a little bit of setting out and using a rod, which I'll just talk you through now.